Hi, my name is Derrick Cartwright, and I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Timken Museum of Art. And because the museum is closed, um, along with so many other institutions at this time, we thought we would share with you some of the projects we're really excited about for the future. And so, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to share my screen with you, and we can talk about this exhibition, which is coming up, we hope, in the fall. Visitors to the Timken will know immediately this great painting by Eastman Johnson, Cranberry Harvest, Island of Nantucket, which was painted sometime around 1880. It's certainly one of his best known works, and it's one of the paintings in the collection that gets requested most often for surveys of American art history because it plays such a central role, not just in Johnson's career, but in our conceptions of what late 19th century American genre painting should be like. It's, as I said, a big painting. It's a painting that Johnson himself struggled to complete over a long period of time, and we know that he was full of ideas for this large, he said, pretentious picture that he was going to create for exhibition on display. And this is the result. It's a painting that we can look at and notice new things in all the time. So it's a work that rewards careful study. And indeed, it's received really wonderful study in the past. So I'm keenly aware of the fact that the Timken itself has done a really important exhibition around this painting back around 1990 when Mark Simpson, who's one of the finest scholars of American art history and has been a mentor to me, did his magisterial show surveying this work, all of the studies that accompanied it, and put it into the richest possible historical and social context. So we know a lot about this painting already, and the problem becomes, how do you find a way to look at something so well understood as Johnson's Cranberry Harvest with fresh eyes? And so I hope we're going to do that. And one of the ways in which I'm most excited to think about this painting is to see it, yes, as a genre painting, and yes, as this very self-conscious effort on the part of the artist to create a kind of exhibition picture that would speak about the moment, but also to see it in the context of sexual politics of the late 19th century, and specifically the way in which women are represented. So this is a year, as many of you know, that Megan Pogue, the director of the museum, has designated 2020 as a year of women at the Timken, and all the exhibitions will contend with ideas about the representation of women and by women as a result of that thematic emphasis. But we're going to take a new look at our painting by Johnson and try to not only see it in the context of his career, which I'll talk about in a moment, but also how it relates to the ideas about women's roles in society that were circulating so broadly at the time. So I'm here just showing you a portrait of Johnson from about the time that he was painting Cranberry Harvest, and then also a view of his studio around 1870. And we know that in 1870, Johnson moved for the summers to Nantucket Island, which is where he painted the Timken's work. And so this wood engraving, not I think by Johnson, but by another artist, looking at his studio as part of a kind of promotional piece that appeared in Harper's New Monthly magazine, shows how he would have worked at this time that he began to tackle this big painting. And if you look closely at his studio, you'll see it's, well, maybe not that different from many artists' studios at the time, but he has both landscapes and portraits sitting on his easel. And I want to think about the role of portraiture in the daily life of an artist, a really important artist like Johnson at this moment. If we think back at the time period that most interests me in this study, we're really looking at the period from the Civil War to 1880, when the Cranberry Harvest gets painted. We see a real shift in Johnson's priorities, particularly as they relate to the representation of individuals and families. So around 1864 or so, he paints the picture I'm showing you on the left, the Blodgett family, which is also known as Christmas Time, which hangs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And in it, you just see this really generous representation of family life in upper middle class New York situations. So you've got this well-appointed interior, these beautiful children, the upright father. And then in the very far background, you see a woman relaxing in an armchair, sort of taking it all in, but in a subsidiary role to the whole scene. And almost at the same moment, if we compare it with a work called Fiddling His Way, done maybe a year or two later, we see a very different role for women in this family situation. Obviously, it's a different kind of family, and the circumstances in which they're living are quite different, but Fiddling His Way shows the centrality of this mother figure who's really the center of family life and around which the whole scene is organized, even though her focus and her child's focus in her arms are the fiddling man on the left side of the painting. It's actually a painting that I played a small role in helping the Terra Foundation in Chicago to acquire a long time ago. So it's a painting that actually means a lot to me, and I think putting it into a new context will be fun. But if you think about 1880 and this large composition that Johnson creates and that we get to live with all the time here in San Diego, one of the things that strikes me most is it's a representation of community life, for sure. There are men and women across this large horizontal space, and scholars like Mark Simpson have been able to locate this cranberry bog very carefully within the landscape of Nantucket. It's even possible to imagine the kind of social exchange that's going on as this communal event takes place, where men and women together, but mostly women, are shown picking the cranberries that help give the identity to this place. But in the very center of the picture, and which is the background to the screen I'm showing you now, there's this upright woman waiting to receive her child who's being brought to her in the field, so presumably she can nurse it. It's a painting that Johnson really makes a point to establish the centrality and the focus of women in this social scene. And it's a painting that in the very same year, he sends this work to the National Academy of Design's exhibition. He shows another painting called The Reprimand, and I'm here showing you a wood engraving after that painting, which done about 1880 as well. This particular wood engraving is after Eastman Johnson, was engraved by another very important artist of the late 19th century, Walter Sherlaw, and it's called The Reprimand. And it shows this young woman sort of, again, in this position of near defiance in this setting. It's actually a setting that looks a lot like what we saw the interior of Fiddling His Way. It's a very modest, sort of ramshackle interior space, and this young woman is a commanding presence within that space. And it's that interest in representing women as forces within these compositional narratives that interests me in Johnson's work, beginning really in the post-Civil War period, but continuing throughout his career at that point. I'm just showing you a couple of other examples of these Nantucket pictures, the kind of imagery that Johnson makes as he's moved away from his sort of known works of Civil War representations and portraiture, as I'll say again in a moment. These are paintings of women in these idyllic settings, women who are enjoying the life after the Civil War, a life of the mind, as shown in the painting on the right, which many of our viewers will know because it hangs at the San Diego Museum of Art. It's a woman reading, and here she has the kind of monumentality and grace of that sailboat that sort of mirrors her form in the background. Or then on the left of this painting called The Pet Lamb, which again is set in the Nantucket fields, and this young woman in this pastoral setting who's befriended this lamb. It's another one of these prints that helped popularize Johnson's reputation at this time and would have been destined for middle-class households. And so it's, I think, an index of the ways in which Johnson is reaching new publics with new imagery in the post-Civil War period. We're really fortunate in San Diego that there are local collectors who have great works, and one of the works that we're able to show the public, we hope this fall, is a portrait by Johnson done in 1874 of Princess Marie of Holland, and that comes to us from this really important local collection. We'll be able to pair that work with other non-portraits such as Catching the Bee, which is another great genre image by Johnson from the same moment, a painting that usually lives at the Newark Art Museum. So bringing these works together, thinking about Johnson's strategies or showing women both in formal settings and informal settings is something that I think promises to bring a great reward to visitors to the Timken. One of the paintings that I'm most excited about sharing with our public here is this great big painting from the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. called The Girl I Left Behind Me, which is in many ways a kind of signature work for Johnson's post-Civil War practice. And it's a painting, the title of which relies heavily on this popular song of the era. Actually, it's quite an old song, but it had a kind of revival in the late 19th century, especially around the Civil War, when soldiers from both the North and South would sing about the girl they left behind as they went off to war. And so I'm interested in how Johnson picks up on this popular subject matter and how he transforms it. So if you look at sheet music, like the image I'm showing you on the right, which comes out of London and which helps document this rave for this kind of lyrical performance. It's quite different, I would say, in spirit and in intent from what Johnson shows us with this young woman on this windswept bluff looking out on this gray landscape. It couldn't be more romantic and more sort of emotional in terms of how Johnson chooses to represent this work. And it's almost incidental that the title is coming from this popular song. On the other hand, I think Johnson expects that every single one of his viewers of this painting will sort of hear that song in their head as they look at his new work. The last thing I wanted to say before I stop this brief presentation is that having a show like this one at the Timken, which examines the representation of women in late 19th century American art, really helps us understand a much broader context for painting in this period. So we're really fortunate at this moment to have this late 19th century painting on the left by Ella Ferris Pell, who was an American woman working in Paris in 1890. And she gives us this really mysterious figure of Salome, who of course is holding in her hand the platter, the silver platter that will receive the head of John the Baptist. She's this really introspective and alluring figure, and it's a painting that belongs to another fantastic collection here in San Diego, the collection that belongs to Sandy and Bram Dijkstra, and we have it in this exhibition that's currently at the Timken but not on public view. Unfortunately, it's in this show that I did with my students called Captivating Women. Look at how different in 1890 that representation of the female form is from William Morris Hunt's 1866 portrait of Mary Elizabeth Robbins, who was the young wife of this really important Boston industrialist, Royal Robbins, and who's sort of fixed in this beautiful arts and crafts interior space and painted beautifully, but actually seen as an object and treated as this kind of objectified subject, whereas there's so much mystery shot through the portrait by Pell of, it's not a portrait, it's a subject painting of Salome in 1890. And that's the time frame that we really want to inspect in this exhibition, from the 1860s till the pinnacle of the Gilded Age in works like Pell. And so thinking about Johnson at the very center of that representational debate and discussion about how women should be represented is a new way to think about his career and his work. So I'm really hoping that all of you will stick with us. I hope you're all going to stay healthy and come and see our exhibition this fall at the Timken Museum of Art. I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.